Foreign Minister Penny Wong has given a speech to the Lowy Institute this afternoon where she claimed that a lack of diversity would be a threat to national security. In her Alan Gyngell Lecture in Sydney, she took aim at Pauline Hanson's call for a monoculture.
I've always believed that the ability of Australians to connect with people from every part of the world is a national asset. A national asset that expands our choices in the world. The call for a monoculture is a call for Australia to curtail our choices and to cut off our connections. To look inwards, to have no friends to work with, no partners to trade with, and no opportunities to grow from.
Now, that is simply not what is meant by monoculture. It's not about cutting ourselves off from anyone. It's not about being intolerant to people from other backgrounds. It's not about living in silos. In fact, it's about getting people out of their silos. It's saying that as a country we should be one, all of us, no matter where we come from. We should all share one Australian culture rather than retreating to cultures from countries in which we no longer live. How that curtails our choices and connections, I don't know. It means, to me, a stronger Australia. But Ms Wong went on to say it would make Australia less secure in the world.
But well before we could ever realise this melancholic fantasy of monoculture, there is a lot of damage that could be done. Because Australians would be turned against each other. Australia would be a more hostile place, harder to be family, harder to be friend, colleague or neighbour. At a time where external and internal forces are seeking to divide us, turning Australians against each other makes us more vulnerable. Division makes us easier to exploit. It does not make us stronger.
Again, she says we'd be turned against each other. Well, no, not unless people want to separate themselves from Australian culture, in which case, why do you live in Australia? The idea is to bring us all together under one culture, not to make it harder to be a friend or a colleague or a neighbour, but easier, because we all share something. And this idea that it threatens our national security. A country united by a common culture and thus a common goal ought to be far more secure than one where many cultures operate in their own little pockets with their own objectives. And while I'm talking about foreign affairs, the Prime Minister had an overnight phone call with US Donald Trump where Anthony Albanese pushed for tariffs on Australia to be dropped.
The ask that I made of the President is that he consider full exemption, and the President agreed that he would give consideration to my request.
Joining me now to discuss all of this is Strategic Analysis Australia Director Michael Shoebridge. Michael, good to see you as always. I'll start with Penny Wong's comments, the Foreign Minister at the Lowy Institute today. Do you agree with her assessment that a monoculture, by which Pauline Hanson meant, you know, we all share one culture as opposed to having multiple different cultures operating under multiculturalism as we know it today, would somehow lead to a weakening of our place in the world and put us in a more dangerous place geopolitically?
No, Caleb, I thought it was a really odd speech. I mean, we're all used to Foreign Minister Wong using her speeches to congratulate herself on how magnificent she is. In this one, she even mused about how a dead historian might write glowingly of her were he still alive. But on the Pauline Hanson stuff, she was amazing. It turns out Pauline Hanson is like the Voldemort for the Labor Party, you know, this evil villain that can't be named. So we got this entire speech allegedly about foreign policy, but really self-congratulations combined with pretty awful domestic politics from Penny Wong.
It's quite extraordinary, and I don't understand how you can legitimately argue that uniting a country under one culture, and that's not to say that you come from another country and therefore you must forget that you've come from another country. Of course, we welcome good parts of other cultures to be part of ours, but uniting under one culture is exactly what you need in order to have a country that could stand up to foreign conflict or to threats, I would have thought. You need a country that is united under a common goal, and if you have a fractured country caused by many cultures operating in their own silos, you don't get that.
No, and how ironic to have a government minister use a speech allegedly about foreign policy to talk all about domestic politics and then use it in quite a divisive way and pretend she's calling for unity. I mean, it really was magical thinking from Penny Wong. Maybe she's hoping nobody but the Labor Party faithful will read this speech.
Well, too late. We've talked about it here. Just quickly, Michael, speaking of magical thinking, of course, the Prime Minister had a chat with Donald Trump overnight. He asked him to reconsider the tariffs that are currently on Australia. What do you think the chances are of any movement?
I think they're zero. And in fact, when the Prime Minister briefed journalists about his call with Donald Trump, we've only got the Prime Minister's readout, by the way. There's nothing from the White House. President Trump didn't think it was a priority to say what they talked about. We got an entire laundry list of stuff. AI, Trump's birthday, bushfires, Fiji, space. Tariffs only came up when a journalist asked a question. And what the Prime Minister got, what it all boils down to, is Trump not being rude to him. But Trump will not change course on this, and the Prime Minister knows that.
Right, picture this. Our Foreign Minister stands up at the Lowy Institute in Sydney and tells the nation that wanting a shared culture is now apparently a national security threat. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, our Prime Minister is on the phone to Donald Trump, essentially begging for a tariff exemption like a tradie trying to talk his way out of a parking fine. Two very different flavours of diplomacy happening in the same fortnight. Buckle up because this one gets interesting. Quick favour before we continue. If you are enjoying this breakdown, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Over 90% of you watching haven't yet, and it genuinely costs nothing, takes about 2 seconds, and helps this channel keep bringing you honest political analysis. Cheers if you did. Now, let's continue. So here is what actually happened. On Friday, the 14th of August, Penny Wong delivered the Alan Gyngell Lecture at the Lowy Institute, and the central argument was this: multiculturalism is not just a nice social value, it is strategic capital. Her words were that a call for a monoculture is a call for Australia to curtail its choices and cut off its connections, to look inwards and have no friends to work with. Sounds reasonable enough on the surface, doesn't it? Diversity helps with trade, diplomacy, and building relationships across the region. Nobody is arguing against having friends overseas. But here is where it gets spicy, and this is where we need to shift gears, because while Wong never said the words Pauline Hanson out loud, everybody in that room knew exactly who she was talking about. Hanson had called for a more unified national culture back in June at the National Press Club, and Wong's entire speech was structured as a rebuttal without ever naming the opponent. Strategic Analysis Australia Director Michael Shoebridge put it best when he described it as, and I am paraphrasing here, a genuinely strange speech, more suited for domestic political theatre than serious foreign policy. He even joked that Hanson has become the political equivalent of the villain nobody in the Labor Party is willing to name out loud. That is a cracking line, and honestly, it captures the vibe perfectly. Now think about that for a second, because this is the real issue. Is national security genuinely served by lecturing Australians about unity using a stage built for talking about trade routes and regional alliances? Or is this more like using a sledgehammer to hang a picture frame? Technically possible, but wildly disproportionate to the task. Shoebridge's argument was that cultural cohesion actually strengthens a country's standing on the world stage rather than weakening it, and that turning a debate about identity into a security issue risks becoming more divisive than the thing it claims to be solving. Right, let's pivot, because while all this rhetorical sparring was happening in Sydney, something far more consequential was unfolding on the phone lines between Canberra and Washington. Just one day earlier, Albanese had a call with President Trump, described afterwards as warm and productive, which in political speak often means nothing concrete actually happened yet. The real substance was Albanese pushing hard for Australia to be exempted from a proposed 12.5% tariff tied to concerns about modern slavery in supply chains. Albanese outlined Australia's efforts to strengthen accountability, and Trump agreed to, quote, give consideration to the request. Consideration. Not a yes, not a no, just a very polite maybe, delivered with the sort of charm that keeps everyone smiling for the cameras. And this is the contrast that makes this whole story fascinating. One conversation was loaded with values, principles, and grand statements about national character. The other was a straightforward, almost transactional negotiation built entirely on leverage and shared interest, with barely a mention of shared values at all. It's a bit like comparing a passionate speech at a wedding toast to a hard-nosed negotiation over a car price. Both involve talking, but only one of them actually moves the needle. So, what does this tell us about where Australia sits on the world stage right now? It suggests that our loudest diplomatic statements are often aimed inward at winning domestic political arguments, while our actual influence abroad depends far more on pragmatic deal-making than principled speeches. Wong's address might resonate strongly for certain audiences here at home, but it carries very little weight in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, Albanese's tariff diplomacy, unglamorous as it is, will likely determine real-world outcomes for Australian exporters than any lecture at a Sydney think tank ever could. The bigger question worth sitting with is this: can Australia genuinely present a united, credible foreign policy to the world while our domestic politics remain this fractioned over identity, unity and belonging? Or will our international reputation increasingly be shaped less by what we say we stand for and more by how loudly we're arguing with each other back home? Something to think about as this story continues to develop. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. And please don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below.